Leader present. We'll call the Senate Regulated Industries Committee to order February 15th, 2022. We have 3 bills on our agenda today. We left off after hearing testimony from a few people that were from out of town, Senator Dolezal last week on your bill. So we'd like to start with it. If you want to make your presentation, we find it to be easier if you go to the podium because it's mic'd up and on camera.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're talking about Senate Bill 393. Committee members, you will see there is a committee sub in your folders. This has some minor technical changes to the original bill. Nothing significant or substantive, I don't believe. Senator Dolezal, in your coverage of the bill, if you would point out to our committee the differences that you've got on this committee sub from the originally dropped bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can perform this stupid human trick of balancing my computer on this podium, I will do just that.
My committee members, it's LC 36507-5S. That's what we're working off of, okay? That's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to thank you for accommodating my absence last week as I was unable to be here. And thank you for allowing those who had traveled from out of state to opine on this important topic. You know, one of the things I enjoy most about being a member of the General Assembly is having the opportunity to study a vast array of topics, things that, you know, when you run for office, you don't even contemplate considering. And you do have the opportunity then to hear from subject matter experts on those topics, 2 of which you had here last week. And this afternoon, we're joined via Zoom by law professor Adam Knoob, who will be helping me present this bill. The professor serves at the Michigan State University and has quite the pedigree to discuss this topic with us today. Mr. Chairman, this bill centers around the idea of common carriers. Common carriers, the concept of common carriers go back to common law. And it states that by nature of their near monopoly status, common carriers obtain common carrier status. This is not based on their own declaration, but it is based on the size and scope of their reach. Therefore, airlines, railroads, telecommunication services, and others are common carriers. Common carriers can become a common carrier really in 2 ways. One is by providing a basic public function, which you'll hear the legal experts among us refer to a public accommodation, or by market dominance, or the near monopoly status that we now see achieved by social media companies. Common carriers can still regulate. They can still have regulations internally, and they can even exclude participation based on reasonable grounds. What we are attempting to do with this bill is very simple. It's very narrow in its scope, and that is to eliminate viewpoint-based censorship. This does not prohibit them from allowing pornography and some of the other things you heard in the previous testimony or other lewd material. This bill would indeed stop viewpoint-based censorship, but would not prevent standards-based censorship. I want to repeat that again. This bill will indeed stop viewpoint-based censorship, but will not prevent standards-based censorship. You've heard a lot about Section 230. Section 230 is in the Communications Decency Act. And Professor Knoob will unpack this further in a moment, but we do not believe that Section 230 precludes viewpoint-based censorship. We believe the viewpoint-based censorship is still allowed under Section 230. You heard about some court cases. There's really four court precedents that come into this discussion. Tornillo, which the courts ruled that newspapers are not required to print political candidates' reply to coverage, so they're not required to they're not compelled to speech in that way. Hurley was referenced in the previous testimony as well. And that was where a parade was not forced to allow certain groups to participate. But what you did not hear about in the testimony before were the court precedents that come down in favor of what we're trying to do here. The first of which is Rumsfeld, which upheld the requiring of law schools to host military recruiters, even if they did not want to. And then perhaps most importantly, Pruneyard. And Pruneyard required shopping centers to let protesters hand out leaflets on their property, even if the shopping center owners did not agree with them. And in that court case, one of the opinions said, quote, "The views expressed by members of the public in passing out pamphlets or seeking signatures for a petition thus will not likely be identified with those of the owner." We think that is part and parcel to exactly what is happening here. Nobody is going to confuse my viewpoint, should I post it on social media, with the viewpoint of Mark Zuckerberg. And then really the case that laid the foundation for this entire concept of common carrier here in the States was that of Turner Broadcasting, where cable companies, cable operators were made to carry local broadcasts. Once again, they were made to provide communication, compelled speech really, for something that they may not have wanted to. So with that in mind, I want to walk you through the bill, Mr. Chairman, and then outline some responses to the testimony that we heard last week. Lines 17 through 36 establish social media platforms as common carriers. Lines 83 to 92 outlaw viewpoint censorship. This is the meat of the bill. And what we're attempting to do here is to prevent the censorship based on the viewpoint of the user.
Sorry.
I'm on line 85, Mr. Chairman.
85. Okay. All right.
And that really continues on through line 92. Lines 104 through 113 define the scope of this law. It's limited to users that reside in the state, do business in the state, or share or receive expression in the state. And then it is confined to a common carrier that functionally has no more than 20 million users in the United States in a given month. Lines 121 to 133 poke a hole in some of the arguments you heard about last week, wherein we state specifically what censorship is allowed. Lines 135 to 181 provide a transparency mechanism to ensure compliance with this code. And the long and the short of that, Mr. Chairman, is we basically require the social media, the common carriers, to state how they are censoring and the number of times in which they were censoring. And then finally, lines 182 to 193 are enforcement provisions that give a cause of action for those whose viewpoints are censored. Before turning it over to Professor Knub, I want to outline some of the claims that you heard last week and then our response to those claims. And you had some fantastic presenters here last meeting. They eloquently outlined their case. And quite frankly, it's a little unfair that I had the opportunity to prepare and walk in the door with those responses. But I do want to say that I do think that they made their case with great passion and even great expertise. The first claim that we heard was that this bill creates an incentive to take down controversial content. The reality is this bill prohibits discriminatory takedown of content by platforms. The next claim that you guys heard last week was that this bill would not prohibit the platforms from removing any type of content, bullying, hate speech, nudity, spam, etc. That is not true. This bill only prohibits discriminatory takedowns. For example, those who support nudist lifestyles can state why they may support a nudist lifestyle, but they're not able to submit a photo if the platform should have a rule around it that would show them participating in such a lifestyle. However, I will note that some of these social media platforms, Twitter in particular, does allow pornography on their platform. It is merely behind a click that states that you're over a certain age. So there's a lot of trepidation that behind this podium from those representing at least one company who does allow pornography on their platform. Another claim that we heard was the disclosure requirements would help child predators. That in other words, if we described how the algorithm worked, the child predators would reverse engineer the algorithm that was used for censorship to somehow lure children in. This seems highly speculative. Obviously, that's not the intent of this legislation. If we do see that happening, obviously we will address it at the time. But I do not think that, as somebody who's in technology, I do not envision child predators hacking around the algorithms of these social media companies. The other claim that we heard was that social media platforms, by virtue of their business, moderate content to make the entire product, quote, family friendly. The reality is the platforms vociferously argue in court that they are immune from liability for third-party content under Section 230 because they are not editors. In other words, they're arguing it both ways. They're saying that they do argue, they do filter, therefore they keep it family friendly. But when they're in court, they say 230 applies here because we don't filter and don't moderate the content. We're not editors of the content. We're simply transmitting the speech of others. And then lastly, they make the claim that the Communications and Decency Act preempts what we're trying to do here. And the reality is that the only part of the CDA that deals with takedowns is in Section 230, which you've now heard mentioned 3 times. And then it only protects from legal liability takedowns of certain types of content, obscenity, indecency, etc. There is no preemption here because the scope is limited to certain areas of content that Georgia does not address and which the Georgia statute allows to be removed. Further, our statute deals simply with viewpoint, not content. And with that, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, I'd like to turn it over to Professor Knoob, who will provide much more detailed, intelligent, and thorough information on this topic.
Before you get to him, let me ask you just a couple to make sure I got my head around this. When you are referencing common carrier, is that, I'm looking in your definitions here on line 54, says that includes a social media platform. Is that what you're talking about by common carrier, or is it broader than just social media platforms?
So for the portion of this section of code, we are defining social media platforms as common carriers. If you then look on lines, let me find it. Lines 64 through 67, you'll see where we define social media platform as a means internet website or application that is open to the public, allows the user to create an account, and enables users to communicate with other users. So essentially, we define social media platform later in the bill, where we outline that social media platforms are common carriers. Furthermore, we reference later in the bill, and I highlighted this earlier, that we are referencing common carriers that have more than 20 million users a month in the United States.
And that leads me to my second question: why? Why are you only trying to regulate or prevent censorship from the big cats instead of any social media platform?
Because we do think those are the ones that have near monopoly status. And we think those are the ones that do provide the public function, the public accommodation. That the Supreme Court justice you heard referenced previously referenced these as the modern public square. So in the same way that I can walk out in front of the Capitol or walk outside of this room and communicate my speech and not be censored, we believe that the same thing should happen on the modern public square, which are these social media platforms.
So what's the magic about being a common carrier? Why not just call these people what they are, so large social media platforms? Is there something that government can only regulate common carriers and they can't regulate other private businesses?
It is. So the case court precedent, and really a lot of this comes from a sitting Supreme Court justice who, when he discussed the issues that we have with the unfair censoring of viewpoints in social media, he said that what the states should look to do is to regulate these companies as common carriers. He then went on to outline why social media platforms would qualify as common carriers. And then we have all the precedent of other common carriers and the regulation that flowed from them: telecommunication companies, railroads, airlines, et cetera. So, when you look at this, this will be adjudicated. It is being adjudicated. The Florida law, Judge Hinkle has a stay on this currently. The Florida law is different from our law. This law is closer to the Texas law. But we think that we enter a Supreme Court case with a 1-0 lead. And no other justice has come out on the opposite side of publicly of considering these common carriers.
Okay. And we learned a little bit about this last week when you weren't able to be here. There are 2 states that currently have similar type laws or with the same objective: Texas and Florida. Did you model this after either one of those states' laws?
This is closest to the Texas law. Florida was very specific around political candidates. Qualified political candidates could not be deplatformed. We have a much more narrow scope in this bill that simply says no matter your viewpoint, doesn't matter if you're a qualified political candidate or anybody else in the state, that your viewpoint cannot be discriminated just by virtue of the fact that the common carrier determines that they don't like your viewpoint.
Okay. All right. We'll hear from, I'm sorry. Got another question from our Vice Chairman, Senator Brass.
I think Chairman there was alluding to it a little bit, but I'm not sure my question was going to be answered. But the 20 million that were, users that were using, where did we pull that number from exactly?
So all these numbers are somewhat arbitrary. Florida and Texas use 50 and 100 million respectively. We want to capture those that we think have that near monopoly status that would indeed qualify them as a common carrier. So it wouldn't be the startup, that's getting off the ground today, because we don't think that's necessarily the public common square, the modern day public square. in order to have that modern day public square and qualify as a common carrier, you need to have some scale to what you're doing such that it is analogous to walking out in front of this Capitol and saying something in public.
All right. And I guess a follow-up question, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, if let's say a platform does have, or a common carrier does have 20 million, they're right at that number. And I know there's things out there online that people saying that they are getting dumped off of some of these platforms. What if they, is there anything that would prevent, say, a Twitter from dumping followers or dumping members to get below that 20 million? And I'm sure they're well over, so that's not going to be an issue.
I think economics would be the thing, because ultimately they're monetizing our data, and we're going to deal with some of that in another bill. But they are in the business of selling my information to people that will come market to me. So I think that the idea that they would scale down to try to get around our number, which happens to be the lowest of any of the 3 states that we're talking about here, I think is unlikely.
And I guess I'm thinking more on the bottom end of a company or a common carrier that's in a growth period. Would they want to, if they got to that 20 million or they were approaching that, would they stop taking members or whatever? But
yeah, I think it's important to remember. It's a great question, Mr. Chairman. What we are doing here is just saying that they cannot discriminate based on viewpoint, right? This is not an onerous regulation. This is not saying that they need to do anything crazy. This is saying that they need to provide that public accommodation that's provided right now by other common carriers all over this country.
Okay, thank you.
Does that keep these type of social media platforms from propounding a certain philosophy or viewpoint of their own? I'm sitting here in my mind, and I understand the fact that President Trump was kicked off of several of these platforms was irritating to a lot of people, and seemed like he was being canceled would be the term. I think we got to remember that's experienced. But doesn't this also apply? He's now creating a network, a social media platform. You would likewise prevent him from excluding radical left viewpoints that he might totally disagree with if this were to pass, right?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. I never thought that I would do this, but I'm going to, and you probably never thought I would do this. I'm going to quote Bernie Sanders. Because the reality is this comes from both directions, right? We have seen examples, for instance, of Instagram censoring pro-Palestinian commentaries. So we have people on the left and the right who are concerned with who the people are that are doing the censoring. And Senator Sanders stated yesterday, as you mentioned, it was Donald Trump that was banned. And tomorrow it could be somebody else who has a very different point of view. I don't like giving that much power to a handful of high-tech people. So that's really what we're trying to do, is to say you cannot discriminate based on viewpoint, whether it's leftist viewpoint, right, or you're right down the middle. We are recognizing that in the modern public square, this near monopoly status of these companies does deem them common carriers, and therefore they need to provide that public accommodation.
All right. I may not have the pronunciation right, but Professor Adam, is it Candub?
That's correct, sir. Yes. Correct, sir.
The floor is yours. You're on Zoom. We can see you, and we can hear you fine if you'll proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know if I really can add much to what Chairman Dolezal said, because he did such a superb job setting forth some of the basic issues. But I will add a little bit, starting from your comments, sir, about why do we rely upon the concept of common carriage? This legal concept goes back really 300-400 years back to England. And the idea was that there's some types of industries, whether it's a stagecoach, whether it could be an inn on a traveled way, or later a railroad or telegraph, which serves such a basic function that it wasn't right for them to exercise the power to exclude people arbitrarily. They had a basic offering to the public, and that offering should be made to everybody. And they shouldn't be able to play games, whether they're ideological, whether they're personal, because if people don't have access to these industries, they can't really fully partake in citizenship. And I think that's the motivation of these bills, is that for better or worse, these platforms have become the sine qua non of fully participating in American life today. And thus their owners, if they wish to exercise ideological preferences, can really slant our political life, because as the Supreme Court said, the internet is the modern public square. And of course, there's obvious evidence that this is happening. This is not a paranoid fantasy. I think the canceling or the squelching of Hunter Biden, the Hunter Biden laptop story, very possibly could have changed the result of a presidential election. We see the reaction to COVID, where really just basic scientific questions were censored, experts were thrown off, and then I would argue have led to an often misjudged and even hysterical reaction because voices of moderation were silenced. And it's not going away. If you look at Facebook's most recent iteration of what it calls hate speech, it's those who disagree with the consensus on climate change. Well, there's a lot of scientific dispute about what's going on there. And so all of a sudden we see a narrowing. We see in a country that's supposed to be about freedom, in the place where people discuss ideas, we actually are seeing fewer ideas, and they're clearly having a slant. I mean, I think any objective observer would have to agree with that. So what we're doing is going back to these older concepts of common carriage. The idea was, look, the stagecoach, if you have to go from New York to Albany, the stagecoach can't refuse you. In the same way, if you want to make your point view, your views known, Facebook can't refuse you an account. Now, this is not some sort of burdensome or excessive government regulation. As Chairman Dolezal pointed out, these only go to viewpoint. So Facebook will be free to continue its policy of prohibiting nudity. Facebook will be free to get rid of sexual material or even violent or unlawful material if it has a policy against it. But what it can't do is say, look, we're going to discriminate against certain kinds of viewpoints, like those people who are, for instance, skeptical about the public policy response to COVID, or for those people who think that Hunter Biden's laptop is actually authentic. Those disputes on those sort of issues would not be permitted. You have to allow people to express them, and so that as Chairman Dolezal pointed out, was the meat of the bill, which is found in this non-discrimination point, which essentially says you shall discriminate on the basis of viewpoint. Again, the distinction between viewpoint and, let's say, just a content discrimination, let's say discrimination against a certain class of material like pornography or violent or unlawful material, is one well established by the Supreme Court. It was established in one of the most recent statements on the First Amendment, that would be Gilbert, and it's an established and distinction that courts will understand and be able to apply. Just to reiterate, I of course listened to the testimony last week, and I was actually quite surprised by it, in that some of the statements, again, to refer to the cases that Chairman Dolezal discussed, really don't support the claim that it's somehow un-American to require platforms to carry content. To the contrary, to quote Justice Breyer, requiring someone to host another person's content is often a perfectly legitimate thing for government to do. And that's because it happens all the time. We live with these requirements, and they're quite unremarkable. So for instance, most telephone companies are still regulated as common carriage or common carriage type obligations. So the telephone company can't refuse you a telephone if you're Jewish or if you're African American or if you're homosexual. They have to provide you a telephone. And simply, we're just applying this principle to social media. They have to give their accounts to anyone who would like them, and who will follow their rules. Similarly, the cases such as Turner, where cable systems are required to carry on over-the-air broadcast stations. Again, the court upheld that. They said that was fine. Why? Because they said, look, the importance of communications, of having a vibrant political society in which all ideas are discussed and there's a great diversity of viewpoints. That's an important public policy. And so therefore the incidental imposition upon the cable systems is outweighed by this interest. Similarly, in this bill, we're saying, look, what is the burden on the social media companies? They may have to have some accounts that they don't like, that Mr. Zuckerberg would prefer not to have, but it doesn't really hurt him. I mean, there's more customers. They have a bigger customer base. They have more eyeballs to sell to advertisers. So it's very difficult to see what is this huge imposition, except of course if the owners of social media want to use their vast power to, in fact, shift public debate in ways that they like. And that's the whole point of common carriage, which is, look, no, there's some industries that are so important to the public good that that's something that private individuals should not be able to do on their own. But again, getting back to your point, Chairman, nothing in this bill would at all limit Mr. Zuckerberg's ability to post whatever he like, or the owners of Twitter to tweet whatever they like. They can continue to express themselves in any way. It's just saying they have to apply their rules in a non-discriminatory way. I would like to talk a little bit about the CDA, the Communications Decency Act, which is claimed to preempt or preempt this bill. The Communications Decency Act was a response to a particular case called Prodigy v. AOL. And Prodigy, when I talk about this to my students, they look at me very strange, as if I'm referring to cuneiform or passenger pigeon. But in the very early days of the internet, there was dial-up, if you recall, and it was, you would plug your modem into your telephone wires, and you would get a limited access. Before the development of the World Wide Web, firms like AOL, like Prodigy, gave you access to things like the weather, stock market reports, and bulletin boards. That was the big thing. One of the things. Bulletin boards, where people would like chat rooms today, they would sort of express their views about mostly a lot of stocks and things like that. Sports were big. And so what Prodigy ruled with this one case was that because because Prodigy said, oh, look, we are a family-friendly internet service provider, we will edit these bulletin boards to make sure that there are no bad words in it, nothing like that. And so what the court said was, look, if you're going to do that, well, then you become publisher for the entire bulletin board, and you would be liable for libelous things that were said, for criminal threats. And Congress didn't like that. They said, look, because that was thought would hurt the industry. And furthermore, they wanted AOL and Prodigy and other firms to take proactive measures to get rid of smut, to get rid of dirty words, to get rid of unlawful content. So what they did was they passed Section 230, and the big operative wording in Section 230 is found in Section 230C2. And what it says is simply, and I will get you the exact words, that that no provider or user of an interactive computer service, that would be like AOL or Prodigy, shall be held liable on account of any action voluntarily taken in good faith to restrict access or availability of material that the provider or user considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable. So what 230 C2 said was like, look, AOL, Prodigy, go to town, get rid of all the dirty stuff, and you won't have any liability. You won't become responsible for all of the libelous and unlawful things on your website. We want to give you an incentive for cleaning things up. Okay, so that's the way Section 230 works. If you look at this bill, there's absolutely no tension whatsoever. First, I would refer you to Section 26-6A-8, line 127. And it explicitly says that nothing in this chapter shall be construed to prohibit or restrict a common carrier from censoring obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, or harassing material. So there's a precise carve out for the Section 230 material in this statute. That's sort of the belt and suspenders, because even if it weren't for this provision, there still would be no preemption, because Section 230 is all about removing liability for censoring material that this bill permits. So there actually is no tension between these two bills. They can coexist, they don't conflict, and that's really a red herring.
That's a whole on right there. Hear me okay? All right, so you're referencing this 230C, and that is not a Georgia state law. That's a federal law, Communications Decency Act, right?
Yes, sir.
And you're saying that that law requires these providers to delete obscene, lewd, vulgar material, or does not?
It doesn't require it, but it says if you do so, because the problem was that when in this old case involving Prodigy, the problem was when they started to do that, then what the court said was like, look, if you're going to start editing all of your huge, enormous bulletin boards that has hundreds of thousands of posts, if you're going to start editing that, then you become legally responsible for everything on that page. So if somebody makes a libelous statement, they could sue Prodigy as a publisher. So Congress didn't like that and said, look, we want you to get rid of all this dirty, smutty stuff, and we want you to do so without becoming legally responsible for everything on the page, becoming the publisher for everything on that page. So what they did was
what you're saying in a law professor manner is that these companies can, if they want to, censor lewd, vulgar, pornographic material, and they're not subject to liability.
Yes, I'm sorry. I apologize. You get an A+, and I'm guilty of being a wordy, overly verbose law professor, but that's correct.
You teach. I may need to come take a couple more courses up there. What's your university again?
Michigan State.
All right. Okay, so that's why we have the provision in here that essentially says this doesn't interfere with the Common Decency Act.
Right, exactly.
If you're taking material off to keep lewd pornographic material off, that is not deemed censorship under this bill that we're now trying to prohibit.
Exactly.
Am I reading this right? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for my growth. Anything else you need to say?
I think
I didn't mean to interrupt your flow, but that was when you kept talking about another law.
so.
Everybody's flipping, trying to figure where 230C is. It's not in here.
No worries. I'm sorry. I should have been clearer. I'm sorry. And then just to return to the issues of is this constitutional under the First Amendment? The important part in the Tornillo cases, the Tornillo case and the Hurley case, the Tornillo was involving a Florida statute that said, that told the Miami Herald, look, in your op-ed page, if you run a controversial editorial, you have to publish a response. And the court said that was unconstitutional. And then in Hurley, which involved the St. Patrick's Day parade in New York City, and a gay rights group wanted to march, and the organizing group, which was a veterans association, said no. And the court and the gay group filed its anti-discrimination action, and so the question was whether they could be forced, that they could force the organizing group of the St. Patrick's Day parade to make this to allow this gay rights group to march with them. And in both of those cases, these
Dude, you gotta get back on your broadband bills.
I think that Mr. Zuckerberg
Might
hacked
be
into
having some trouble with
into
your
the stream.
broadband up in Michigan. Stand by, we can't hear you now. We've been canceled. Chairman Dole is all.
I'm happy to
gonna
answer any
continue
questions in
with you.
lieu of him
See
finishing.
what you
Sure.
can do here. You, on lines 131 to 133, there's a mention of the dormant commerce clause. You got to educate even the lawyers here what we're talking about. Any prohibition of this chapter shall not apply to the extent it would violate the doctrine on the dormant commerce clause enunciated by the United States Supreme Court.
Of course, the Commerce Clause, Mr. Chairman, has become the catch-all for federal overreach into states' rights, but that's a different topic for a different day.
Okay.
But the Commerce Clause is used across different areas of case law to regulate businesses from a federal level to preempt states from doing so, in my opinion, in violation of the 10th Amendment, but I digress.
Y'all, you tech people, tell me if you get him back on. So we had conversations last Thursday about, what type of regulation this was going to require. We were all feeling our way. And I was even asking the Public Service Commission if they would have somebody available to talk if needed. You're not asking for any government agency to regulate social media platforms in any way.
No, I mean, this would fall under the code section that is under the code section where the PSC does oversee it. There is a private cause of action in here, but really the only steps that we expect to be taken are twofold. One is the termination of what we see happening right now, which is viewpoint discrimination.
Okay.
The professor mentioned a case that I want to fully unpack. We had in the middle of a presidential election, the oldest newspaper in America published a story that the fact checkers deemed to be false. They prohibited the sharing of that story from the oldest newspaper in America, saying that it was false. It of course it put one of the political candidates in a negative light due to a familiar relationship. Well, that story turned out to be true. And so we saw these social media companies censoring something that we now know is true on the premise that it was false, on the false premise that it was false. And so this has significant impact. It would be the equivalent of a newspaper walking into the public square and to pass out a news story, and somebody somewhere coming along and taking that away and prohibiting myself or yourself, Mr. Chairman, from sharing that story that ran in the newspaper. And so we do think we agree with Justice Thomas that the size and scope of these social media companies in effect do make them common carriers. And as the professor laid out, we think the ability to participate in that online exchange is part and parcel, to the extent that you want to be able to do so, of functioning in modern day life.
Right. So, but your mechanism in this bill, you're defining these social media platforms as common carriers, which allows government regulation. And your regulation is to stop them from viewpoint discrimination.
And I didn't get to my second point, which I apologize for that. We also require them to outline what their algorithms are doing and how they are censoring or not censoring viewpoints. Then we also have a mechanism by which you can file a complaint with them to state that you think something is lewd.
That's where I'm hopping.
And we require them to report.
Is that the only enforcement mechanism? Let's say Facebook snubs their nose at Senator Dolezal in Georgia and they continue censoring something we've said they can't do. Is it just the civil action where you can sue them for doing that you got at the end of your? I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
Lines 183 on is there. It gives a civil cause of action. We're not making this a crime or having the government or any government agency in Georgia take legal action against these.
That's correct,
carriers.
with the exception that should they not comply with an order, they can be held in contempt of court. which is
Yeah.
on line one.
That's if a civil
91.
litigant
Yes.
takes them to court, it's in order to tell them, put me back on that.
That's
platform.
correct.
Okay. And then the rest of this is disclosure information. You're requiring these social media platforms to disclose all their
Oh,
algorithms, content removal, all that. I mean, that's all in page 7 and 8. You start telling them what they have to report to us.
That's correct.
And that's to help citizens figure out whether they've been removed or their content's been censored or something like that.
That's correct. That's to basically ensure the compliance with this code. We believe that transparency is necessary, that the public should know how they are curating and targeting content.
Professor, you back with us?
I am. I apologize, sir.
Okay, that's all right. That's part of broadband problems. Go to lines 131 to line 133 for me. I need a little explanation. What is the Dormant Commerce Clause?
Okay, well, it's not Justice Tom.
What's in here?
It's not Justice Thomas's favorite thing. But the idea is that some laws that states might pass, even though they are solely based or their effect is solely within the state, can nonetheless have as a secondary effect a negative effect upon on interstate commerce, and therefore could potentially be violative of the Commerce Clause. It's actually a fairly esoteric area of constitutional law. As I said, there are many justices who don't like it, like Justice Thomas. But an example might be, for instance, a regulation on trash delivery, which is like trash on like dumps and landfills, and a regulation that is so burdensome that it would essentially prevent trash from going through the state. It would prevent trash from being in landfills and would have a negative effect upon the dealing of trash throughout the country. At that effect, if it was so severe, then the court could say, look, dormant commerce clause is involved. I think that this provision is put in here simply to fend off that claim and sort of say, look, if there's some sort of thing, some court requirement that limits the law in some way in order to be consistent with a conceivable dormant commerce clause problem, that's fine. And to make it as accommodating as possible to any judge who might find this as somehow affecting interstate commerce, because of course the platforms give provide their content on to all 50 states.
So we all agree these platforms are engaged in interstate commerce.
Right, they are, but this bill only regulates behavior within the state of Georgia, and the provision is in.
All right. Any other committee members have questions for either the professor or Senator Dolezal? All right, Senator, I'm going to ask you to stand down momentarily. We'll call you back up, and I have one other speaker. Senator John Albers wants to be heard on this bill. I'm going to let him go to the podium as well.
In there, if some judge thinks that somehow it's
Okay, if you'll stand by, you get to see our Senator Albers testify real quick. You hold tight. We'll be back with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. 11 months ago today, an unethical and immoral group out of Washington, D.C. said a series of tweets that were false against me, copied my employer and all of our major clients. And what started out as a non-issue within 24 hours was the loss of my job. I reached out to the aforementioned company, Twitter, to ask them to take it down because it was false. And they told me, no, it fit within the parameters of their business. And they continued to tell me that until 2 weeks later, after I had lost my job, where they said, you know what, you're right, we should have taken that down. But the damage was already done by folks that were stuck in an echo chamber full of falsehoods, and nobody took responsibility. People came out last week to testify And I agree that our First Amendment is the hallmark of our great republic. They also mentioned they felt big tech was getting better. If anyone really believes that big tech and social media companies are getting better and have acted responsibly, objectively, and ethical, they may also believe in the tooth fairy. It's well documented that the censorship, political leading, electric interference, algorithms, and cancel culture to deliver a different truth and message to people are happening every moment and literally as we speak. And there's striking similarities of what's happening today that happened during America's Gilded Age. As we industrialized, business boomed, and new markets such as railroads, oil, and electric emerged. During that time of extraordinary innovation, a few major companies came to dominate those fields. These monopolies or trusts held significant power over the public and the government. All of our history books detailed the times of Rockefeller, Carnegie, and others. My party, the Republican Party, was the pro-business party then as it is now. Yet it was under the lead of President Teddy Roosevelt, who spearheaded the charge to stop the monopoly's abusive practices using the word trust busting. This includes a variety of techniques, such as breaking up the worst offenders and regulating others to prevent abuse of their power. And you know what? It worked. Platforms are business models that create marketplaces to match different parties with complementary interests. Since platforms don't normally generate their content, they contend they're not responsible for what users produce, thus exempt them from libel, defamation, or other laws and regulations that govern traditional media, like newspapers, television, and others. In other words, these platforms are free speech and assume no responsibilities for what their users communicate. The claim is correct to the extent that most of them do not create their own content, although that varies. However, it is absolutely wrong to claim they don't exercise editorial content control. Traditional television and newspapers are what we call broadcast journalism. Why? It's because they deliver the same content to a broad and general audience. Social media platforms are not. They're narrowcasters. Given their ability to pinpoint who you are, their algorithms choose content exclusively for you and what you want to hear and what you want to see, making frequent, personalized editorial decisions based on your browsing behavior and other platforms. And they connect between multiple platforms as you log in with one profile to access yet another. And they use your geolocation services, both your computer and your telephone. The courts have not interpreted First Amendment free speech protections to be absolute. As we know, courts have allowed for liability for defamation, obscenity, and other exceptional circumstances. And as we all know, you cannot shout fire in a crowded theater, nor are you allowed to yell in a public library. Social media platforms are also what economists call natural monopolies. Though this does not mean they are monopolies like a utility company providing a universal service. It's complicated because these platforms use content based on maximizing your time on their platform, or called stickiness. There's an adage in the media world, and everybody in this room knows it. If it bleeds, it leads. This refers to the fact that sensationalist, violent, and other scandalous content provokes more emotions and simply sells more newspapers or advertising. Although if you see subscriptions to the newspaper, you might argue that point. Hence, there's an acknowledgement and tendency for social media to show emotionally explosive and inaccurate content that speaks to the convictions concerning politics, race, religion, and other topics. This leads users to share with their network in exchanges for likes, for self-affirmation, and status. Some have turned this hyper-personalization bias of platforms' algorithm as an echo chamber or filter bubbles. And the fact that users are more likely to share polarizing topics is called the amplification effect, whether it's true or not. The results of the rise of the population and fringe movements are divisive. They cause tribalistic behavior, and we often see them online, and it's been a serious control for mental health, sociologists, and political scientists. America and Georgia is more divided by social media than reality. We know right here that almost 90+% of the bills that we're going to pass are going to be bipartisan, and almost exclusively unanimous. However, if you look at social media, it will not show that at all. Diversity of opinion is certainly positive and it has to be celebrated. But when social media platforms are not held responsible for the accuracy of the content that they clearly cull and editorialize every day, there's no incentive for them not to show you the most absurd, the most outrageous, biased, or fake news. Excessive social media polarization is undesirable and it erodes our democratic institution that protect free speech and other basic rights. For example, a chemical company that has to abide by environmental regulations to keep us safe. The social media costs associated with these platforms should be controlled to mitigate the worst of its effects. In summary, the consequence of social media platforms that function on a quasi-monopolistic scale are directly and more oftentimes negatively impacting Georgia, as well as the rest of our country. While they offer some good services that I cannot deny, but like many industries today, their undesirable consequences are working against each and every one of us and against the greater social welfare. Legislation such as Senate Bill 393 on how social media platforms should be regulated to minimize social costs are critically needed. I support Senator Dolezal and us doing something about a problem that we all know exists. Thank you.
Senator, how would this bill have impacted your situation? It
If you-
prohibits censorship. You wanted them to censor false comments.
I couldn't even get my comments on the other person
Okay,
as
your
I was
response.
watched.
All right. So you're not asking that Twitter should not have allowed those false comments about you, or else they're going to have to monitor everything on there for its truthfulness.
Well, that's
and be the
correct. But
arbiter of what's true or false.
But as you could see, they made the decision that I was not a problem, yet they would let other groups who are promoting things that they agreed with, politically biased, to support, right? So right now, it's so uneven for what they are doing, and they're so biased in their approach that if we don't begin to put one measure of protections around consumers, then it's all to what end?
I'm not connecting the dots, how
No.
this bill would give you a remedy for what happened to you.
It will not completely remedy my situation. It would have offered me more opportunity to push back on what was truly a false statement, but it would not fix what happened to me. I
But-
can't change what happened 11 months ago, but what we can do is we can make this better moving forward.
Any other questions for Senator Albers?
Thank you, Mr.
so
Chairman.
much for sharing that with us. I don't have anybody else signed up to speak on this bill. Is there anybody that would like to be heard? Professor, are you still with us? Y'all got him or is he gone? Okay. Senator Dolezal, let me ask you a couple more. Did CanDub write either the Florida bill or the Texas bill?
I do not know the answer to that
Do
question.
you know whether he was engaged in the litigation involving either of those?
I do not know that either.
Do you have any knowledge of why the federal courts in each of those states enjoined their statutes? You know, the basis of that?
So they both reference 230. I have some notes here. I know that Judge Hinkle referenced 230 specifically. This is ultimately, I think, going to come down. It's really, it's two balances the courts are testing. One is the 230 question. The second is the First Amendment rights of the platforms themselves. Both Florida and Georgia did go the common carrier route. Florida and Texas, the same way that we did. I think largely because that case was made by a Supreme Court justice prior to any of us writing these laws.
And that's Clarence Thomas's
It was.
opinion? Was that a majority opinion, the ruling, or was that a dissent or concurrence that was just dicta?
That this was side commentary dicta,
Okay.
as you all like to call it, in the Biden versus Knight case, which where he began to unpack some of the issues that we have currently in our society with these social media
So
companies.
he opined that these platforms were similar to common carriers. That is not a ruling of the court that they are.
That's correct. Not only did he opine that they are similar to common carriers, he opined that states could and should begin to take action following that premise.
And if 4 other justices agree with him, then that will become the law. But right now it's undetermined.
That's correct.
But the lower federal courts in those 2 states that we're following their lead here, at least at the trial court level, have said this doesn't fly.
So far, yeah. And I'm sorry, I apologize. I don't know the Texas Circuit Court's name, but Judge Hinkle, who is a Clinton appointee, did reference 230 in his opinion that I read.
Okay. Are there other questions for Senator Dolezal? Thank you for your thoughtful presentation.
Thank you, Mr.
Appreciate it.
Chairman.
What's the pleasure of the committee? Had a motion do pass by Senator Albers. Is there a second? Second by Senator Miller. Any discussion or any proposed amendments? All right, all in favor of Senator Albers' motion do pass, raise your hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 in favor, all opposed, like sign. 5 opposed. All right, thank you. The bill will move on to the Rules Committee. All right, I've had quite a few people signed up and we're not going to get through it today. Senate Bill 420. Senator Huffstetler, Chairman Huffstetler, if you'll present for us best from the podium. Some of us have Judiciary Committee, can't be as complicated as this. Get it.
Be as brief as I can on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, if you could pass those around, Senator Lucas, please. That's just simply the landscape in the southeast right now. And while the FTC had said that the 3-tier system limits consumer options, increases the price of alcoholic beverage, impacts free trade with borders. And while the Georgia Public Policy Foundation said similar things, this is not an attempt to dismantle the 3-tier system, but it is an attempt to put our breweries on a more competitive field with the states around us and to help them grow and thrive. There is a $6,000 cap. I'm sorry, 6,000 barrel cap on production. I'm not attempting to change that in any way or form. What I'm asking is that we be made the same as several states around us, that how you get to that cap be released from a daily limit. In addition, as these breweries try to grow their product, they want to be able to donate to local events. I've heard from several of them that they are not being helped out in that attempt. I've heard from the wholesalers that they are helping them in that attempt. You know, what alternative might be to be like North Carolina that says any brewer under 25,000 barrels could change their distributor with 5 days notice, but there's probably not people that want to do that here. So all I'm asking is they be able to handle marketing of their product at some local events by donating it to those events. Those are the 2 changes in this bill. I know your time is short and I won't get into a lot of details other than that, but let other people speak if that's the pleasure of the chairman.
Any question for Chairman Huffstetler? Senator Harbison.
Mr. Chairman, just briefly, if Mr. Chairman, you would, do I recall that this is what about the 3rd year in a row that we get an increase in this particular category of cases or barrels? Is that?
I haven't been on the regulated industry committee. I haven't testified here ever before, but that you may know that better than me. I'm simply looking at the landscape around us, and particularly with changes other states have had in trying to keep Georgia competitive in this area.
And how does, you got an idea how this would affect what is the 3-tier system that we have in place?
Well, it's just simply saying that, and you know, right now, a brewery couldn't sell a full case of 16 ounce, and some of them do sell 16 ounce beers, and they couldn't do it right now under the cap. And I think that Georgia, being the worst in the southeast of all the states around us, is not competitive. And again, one other thing I want to say is I'm not speaking for alcohol, against alcohol. This is a regulated product. I'm simply trying to put the free market in place a little bit better and let these guys be competitive with what they do.
Other questions? All right, Senator Brass has a question.
I'll thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm gonna ask this question to the author, but I may end up asking this later to a couple of the speakers, but I understand some of the hangups and arguments within the bill between the craft beer and the wholesalers. One part I don't understand, and I'm hoping somebody can shed some light today, is on the donation part. Where's the issue on them on the donation? Tell me.
Their issue would they don't feel like they're getting the marketing help in getting that product out there, and that they would like to be able to do that themselves to respond to local events. The wholesalers would say they are. You know, I've heard both sides of it, and maybe some distributors are better than others at it.
All right, I think I'll ask that question
All
later.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll stand by. Mr. Martin Smith, Georgia Beverage Association, Beer Wholesalers Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Martin Smith with the Georgia Beer Wholesalers Association, and this bill, as Chairman Hosteller described, does two things. It would allow for brewers to directly sell or give or donate product to a licensed retailer, which is today an issue because producers are not allowed by the three-tier system to give anything of value in that manner of product to licensed retailers. That does not mean that they can't go and sponsor an event, or if there's an event that, you know, local junior club or anything like that has having that doesn't have a license, that they couldn't get product to them. But when there is a licensed event where they've gone and got their local license, they've got their state license and become a temporary retailer, then there's taxes that are associated with that. There's product that's got to get all over the state, and it happens every day. I've called every one of my members, and every one of them have the policy of, if they're reached out by their brewer partners to participate in something like this, all they've got to say is, hey, send 30 cases over there. The guys deliver the product. They can either share the cost in that, the brewer can cover the whole cost, or our guys can cover the cost. Doesn't matter. But the policy on every single one of my members is to do that. The second thing that this bill proposes to do is to allow for brewers to eliminate their daily cap, which is 288 ounces per person per day for off-premise sales, meaning that that person can go in today and buy a case of beer. That's the law today. And the intent of that was so that people come in, taste at the tap room, drink some beer there, buy a case to go, and then buy it from the traditional retail location. But in less than 5 years, we have collaboratively worked alongside with our brewer partners to bring some major changes to the breweries go-to market here in Georgia. Most of you in this room served on this very committee when the Senate Bill 85, which gave brewers the ability to sell direct to consumers visiting their brewery. At the time, we worked with the Guild, and this compromise would not have happened without the leadership of the Guild and the members that worked with them. For context, Senate Bill 85 gave breweries the ability to sell 1 million 12-ounce beers direct to the public from that brewery. That was Senate Bill 85 was 3,000 barrels. We worked along with the Guild on HB 273, which passed this very committee and was signed into law less than 9 months ago, which doubled that 3,000 barrels to 2 million, or to 6,000 barrels, which is 2 million 12-ounce beers, or almost 85,000 cases of beer from every brewer would be able to sell direct if you got rid of this daily limit. I think it's important to remember that the legislative intent of the bills that I've referenced was not to give brewers the ability to sell, was to give brewers the ability to sell limited amounts. And the end goal, which was testified to multiple times, to not replace traditional retailers. We have to ask the question that this bill before you, if it were to move, do breweries having the ability to sell kegs out their back door in the amount of 2 million 12-ounce beers a year, does that affect distribution or our retail partners in the industry? Unequivocally, the answer is yes. That is a very substantial number. To address the charitable part, which I kind of did already before, the way that it works is an entity by the rules have to go and get their local deal. They have to be a bona fide charitable organization. They go to the city or county, get their local license, go to the state. They have to have at least a 10-day head start on it, get the state license. Then they become a 3-day temporary retailer. Then at that time, we can sell the product to them. We can give it to them. We can get the product back from them. The brewer just happened this past weekend. There was a big quail hunt down in Albany. The people that wanted the beer there called the wholesaler and said, send 50 cases of beer over there. We'll give you a credit on it. But the brewer wanted to be the sponsor of that thing. Every one of my members that I called after visiting the chairman last week, called every one of them. That is their policy to do, period. But when they are a licensed retailer, it becomes an issue when the brewer is doing that. These marketplace issues have always been a give and take relationship between the craft segment and the other industry players. We have a proven track record that I've gone over on record of working with them. Unfortunately, this relationship now seems much more of a take than a give. My guys are always willing to come to the table and discuss these complex issues. We've done it year and year again. But to come in the middle of the session without coordinating and working with the industry partners and to introduce a bill and expect an in-depth stakeholder discourse is very difficult to achieve. We look forward, as always, to engage with our brewer partners, large and small, and see what genuine market issues exist. And our doors always remain open for that. Simply put, 2 things. Unlimited sales at their locations run afoul of the concept of a tap room, which was established through y'all's committees in this body, being in place for education, for tasting, and for limited sales of the brands that they manufacture on site. Closing, the other folks will tell you that having an annual cap is enough to restrict this. But I'll say, if the past is any sign of the future, we know that this is not a fair and accurate statement, and that the current cap is merely a placeholder and for their push for unlimited brewery sales, and they'll be back next year asking for that. Thank you, sir.
Senator Brass has a question. You're recognized.
All right. So yeah, Martin, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for acknowledging me. I want to go back to my question, and you've touched on it, but call me slow. And I've been called worse. But walk me through a real life situation. So let's say I've got a local charity I'm on a board for, and I call a wholesaler and say, would y'all donate beer, or can I buy it at a discounted rate or whatever?
Yeah.
That's obviously allowed.
It's
But
allowed,
Anheuser-
it's allowed if you've gone to get your license.
Okay. And well, let's assume all that's happened.
Mhm.
So you're saying like Anheuser-Busch directly I couldn't call them and ask them to give me money.
You absolutely can call and ask them. And what they do.
I mean, I know what they're going to say, but
What they do immediately, they'll say, yes, count us in. They'll pick up the phone and call wherever that is in the state that your event's going on. In
Mhm.
your case, it's going to be in Noonan. They're going to call Al Zachary and said, hey, send Matt Brass's thing, that whatever event, 15 cases of beer. And Al will say, no problem. The taxes get remitted to Noonan. The product gets there. That brewery didn't have to take it there. Nobody had to drive there to get it. It's already there. And it came from a licensed wholesaler to a licensed retailer.
okay. So same situation. I call down to say Wild Leap in LaGrange.
Yep.
And I want them to donate. What's
Same exact thing. They'll
Word.
call Al Zachary and say, hey, send them 15 cases of beer. They've got the license. Wild Leap wants all the claim for it. No problem. Al just delivers it.
and so are we changing that process in this bill, or?
Yes, the process in this bill would change it to where that brewer would be delivering that product from the brewery. They're not equipped and they're not set up in the system to remit the excise taxes for these things. They're not equipped to have the chain of custody that we have on it. And the structure of the three-tier system, which we all kind of forget, is a victim of its own success. It's there more than to separate these entities. It's to provide health and safety to our community, and where the driving force is not about the bottom line, but to make sure that people are protected. And then when you break that system down where entities are working not through the system, then you're weakening that system.
Okay, thank you.
All right, other questions from committee members? Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
I'm gonna call two more people, then we're gonna have to adjourn. Some folks we're losing my quorum pretty quickly here, might already have. Only because you put a smiley face on your sign-up sheet, Stoney McGill. Speaking against the bill with a smiley face.
Well, I'm just happy to be here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. My name is Stoney McGill. I'm represent Georgia Alcohol Dealers Association. We're a trade association, represent about 500 retail package stores around the state. We met with these guys working on 85, Senate Bill 85 5 years ago. The key part of that language was it was a limited exemption to the three-tier system, and to go unlimited, that's the opposite of limited. So that's my one beef against the bill. Obviously, Martin's correct in the tax collection aspect of it, but we just feel like the three-tier system works, and we would hope that we won't go unlimited. We'll keep some limits on the exemptions that you guys have created to the three-tier system. And that's all I have, because I know time is short.
Questions for Mr. McGill? All right, thank you. And
Thank you.
try to call somebody from the for side here. I'm just gonna pick, so I'll pick one of your brewers. Let's go with Joseph Cortez, Georgia Craft Brewers Guild. Unfortunately, you're gonna be my last speaker today, but this will come back or we'll save it for a later hearing. So don't give up. We'll have another opportunity to speak before action's taken.
Appreciate it, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak to this. First and foremost, I don't think we're here to litigate before the committee certain rules in this building that some folks follow and others don't, and want to subject certain groups to. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to get in a back and forth conversation in front of this esteemed committee about whatever rules we were subjected to that other folks don't follow. We'd love to be stakeholders and have a collaborative partnership, and we're still willing and ready to do that with our very, very important stakeholders in the industry. We've approached that this year every step of the way, and reaching out to our stakeholders, especially in the wholesale tier. So we still welcome the opportunity to do that, and would love to do that. There's I don't think we're halfway through the session yet, so we are willing and ready to have an earnest conversation in that regard. I'm here representing over 131 independent brewery locations and communities across Georgia in support of Senate Bill 420, urban, suburban, exurban, and rural. These breweries are anchors of local development and help create desirable neighborhoods for people to live, work, and visit. We believe that the increased flexibility that Senate Bill 420 would provide is an important tool for our small businesses to be successful. Specifically, the current daily off-premise limit, or to-go cap, is an artificial and arbitrary barrier that doesn't meet consumer demand, fit current and growing business models, or serve local neighborhoods. We are behind every other state in the Southeast that have either lifted their daily limit or have a much higher cap. These states have managed to maintain a healthy three-tier system, but have also given their local small breweries the flexibilities they need to get more product out direct to consumer and still be able to grow their brands and be viable through distribution. Lowering the daily cap would provide a critical but still limited opportunity, so it'd still be limited for local breweries to grow their brands and reach more consumers in their tap rooms, all while improving the overall beer ecosystem for all three tiers. This is also a missed opportunity to provide more tax revenue for product that is not being picked up through other industry channels, including distribution and retail, that sits at the brewery. That is an opportunity. For example, we have members that I'll briefly, if I may, Chairman, since we don't have time for them all to speak or be recognized, from Athens and Savannah and throughout Atlanta and North Georgia and Cherokee County that are here in support of this bill. This is a missed opportunity for them to get product out in their tap room that is literally just sitting there where folks come through, and this is a tool for tourism and economic development. And we're currently, our members have seen products and SKUs reduced. So I'd love to see that addressed and how we can make up for some of those disparities, especially in light of the pandemic when many of our folks were squeezed. And then finally, I'll just briefly, SB 85 was brought up. SB 85 provided a great opportunity to see brewery growth across the state, but current limitations still keep a low ceiling, especially on smaller models struggling to get out to market and thrive in local communities. Now, that was 5 years ago. We did negotiate, and we were very appreciative to our partners on some language last year that would help clarify some loose ends, we believe, from SB 85 on how we transfer product between multiple locations. But what we're essentially telling our small businesses that are here represented and across the state and local communities that we've provided you just enough of a leash. How many local businesses, local small businesses do we tell you can succeed, but only this much? We're going to put as low of a ceiling as we can because of a notion of the 3-tier system. There's not one 3-tier system. We can have flexibility and keep a healthy 3-tier system. Finally, charitable contributions are also an important part of our breweries being able to fully engage with local charitable organizations and nonprofits and support their causes and events through in-kind donations. And that's the difference. Yes, there is a relationship where our breweries can work with their wholesalers, but if I understand it correctly, what has to happen is these local breweries who have already created that product and have already put in that work have to essentially buy back their own product for the wholesalers to then deliver it. Anyone here who's run a small business knows that is not a direct in-kind charitable contribution. That is an additional barrier to our local breweries being able to engage with local bona fide charitable organizations or nonprofits that have a special permit for that purpose. It also says in the bill to help some of these concerns that any product that has not been consumed at the end of that charitable event for this charitable organization has to be returned to the brewery. So Senator, Chairman, members of the committee, appreciate your favorable consideration for SB 420. And I would end by saying that we often in this building and in the state tout Georgia as being the #1 state to do business. I'm not sure if I asked our breweries here to raise their hand, if any one of them would say that Georgia is the #1 state to do business as a local independent craft brewery. And that's all we're trying to do is move in the right direction.
Let me ask you this. So the cap is the amount of beer you can sell to an individual customer
Correct. The
visiting your craft brewery.
The daily off-premise cap of 288 ounces, which is also a square peg in a round hole. The business models currently have these 16-ounce cans that they sell in 4-packs. That does not equate to a case of 16-ounce 4-packs. So again, it's just an artificial kind of arbitrary cap at this point that doesn't even fit the business
And
model.
now the limit in the aggregate, that's a per customer, is 6,000 barrels a year.
It's total production for what you can sell direct to consumer out of your tap room.
Well, would you be happy if we eliminate the per customer cap but keep the $6,000 aggregate cap?
I think we'd be happy to discuss that with our members. I see some heads nodding. We have a few more that aren't here, but we'd be very amenable to any discussion. To my friend's point with the Wholesalers Association, we have kept a wide open door to discuss this legislation.
Wouldn't that make your customers happy if the ones that come, unhappy if they come in October and you've already exceeded your cap?
Sure, hypothetically, policy decisions are made incrementally in this building all the time on regulations. And, I'd hate to be held to such a tight timeline for our small businesses, but I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. That is not a pressing issue for, I don't think nearly any of our members, maybe one or two. But right now we're focused on the ability to get through that limited channel, and it's still a limited channel, that daily cap lifted, so we can be just basically competitive with other states who have managed to, raise it at all different production levels, by the way. Florida, North Carolina have much higher production levels than ours, especially when you're looking at craft breweries. Alabama's lower. South Carolina, I think, is probably lower. Tennessee, they've all managed to do this and again, keep very thriving systems for all 3 tiers in place.
All right, so to refresh our committee and audience, the 3 tiers are the manufacturer of the brewery, the wholesaler, and then the retailer.
Correct, sir.
Doesn't it benefit these craft brewers to have that system in place so that wholesalers will buy your beer and distribute it all over the state and you don't have to own 55 trucks or whatever? And that retailers will put it on their shelves, grocery stores and whatnot to sell it. So you're not the only source for your, product.
Sir, if I may propose, this is not an either or proposition for us. That's part of the beauty of increased flexibility for our small businesses. They have different channels. One of the most viable channels is and will continue to be through wholesale. As you're scaling your product, especially if you're trying to actually build your brand, which that's one of the biggest problems we have now, is local breweries, local small craft breweries can't effectively build their brand. They're either, we have a Cochrane Mill Brewing in Fairburn, Georgia, just down the road in South Fulton, has been waiting 2 years to hear back from a wholesaler to distribute his product just in Fulton County. Now, I don't necessarily fault the wholesaler, right? What we've created is a system that has allowed breweries to open across the state and be successful at a certain level, but that ceiling is also something where, we're not getting brands picked up. SKUs are actively being reduced in some cases, right? Brands are being reduced. So what other avenues are there for folks? If you get to a certain level and you want to get out to that retail locations, you're going to want to build your brand to a point where the wholesaler can take you on and help you continue to build that brand and to get out into different retailer channels.
The other committee members have questions? All right, Senator Brass, you're recognized for 2 questions.
Thank you,
That's
Mr.
all.
Chairman. Joe, thanks for being here. How many members, and you can ballpark this if you don't know off the top of your head, but how many members do you have that are over that 3,000 barrel limit, that are producing more than 3,000 barrels a year?
The 6,000 now?
Well, no, it was 3,000 a year ago. I'm asking how many are in between that 3,000 and 6,000?
We have, and I'm not at liberty to divulge, specific production.
No, just ballpark a number.
Yeah.
I mean, how many total members do you have? And then how many are over that 3,000 limit is my
We have about
first
131 locations, a few less than that of actual brewery companies. We probably have 1 or 2 that are actually going to be in that ballpark to be between the 3,000 and 6,000. So that's not
one or
the
two.
1 or 2. That's why we're not raising the issue of an annual cap at this point.
So, and I guess this is kind of a political question. Why did we not have this bill last year and last year's bill this year? It seems like if you've got members with, you said they've got beer sitting on the shelf,
Mhm.
all that, wouldn't it make more sense to increase the daily last year and then the yearly this year? Or at least that'd be a better sequence, it seems like.
Senator Brass, I'm glad you asked. All of this was included in our original bill,
Fair enough.
and we opened it for complete dialogue with our partners in the industry.
All right, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Chairman.
This bill will remain in the breast of the committee and 421 as well. Senator, we have scheduled Thursday afternoon several bills involving pari-mutuel horse racing. Senator Mullis, you have a resolution, a constitutional amendment, and your bill. And Senator Beach has companion bills. I studied how they're different. We're going to have a presentation from Georgia Southern University on the economic impact, and be prepared to explain your bill. It's a hearing only. Okay.
Questions, I'll be there. I mean, the hard questions, I'll be there, but the easy question, I'll bring Senator Hitchens. Senator
Hickman will be here to
He's the
present.
expert.
Thank you for being here today. We stand adjourned.